Good evening and welcome to Inside Out. I'm your host, Kyle Simchuk. It's a subject sparking debates in cities across the nation concerning abortions and the alleged sale of aborted fetuses. Tonight, we sat down with protesters from both sides of the recent Planned Parenthood rally here in Pullman. You'll hear their thoughts on women's health care and the arson which closed this building behind me. But first, we begin with Cooper, a pro-life supporter who discusses abortion.
So you don't want Planned Parenthood to exist necessarily, and because of the reasons of abortions, is that correct?
Yeah.
And most of the services they provide, though, they don't pay for abortions, or at least the government funding that they receive doesn't go towards abortion.
But the government, the money that they do get from the government, it doesn't necessarily pay for abortions, but if they didn't receive that, then it would be pretty hard to perform abortions in a building where they don't have electricity, right? It would be pretty hard to perform abortions if the lights couldn't remain on. So I think that even though the government money doesn't go directly to paying for abortions, I think that because of that, because of the immoral nature of the abortive services, that is just grounds for cutting them off from public funding.
For example, Planned Parenthood, they offer pregnancy tests, tests for STDs, STI testing. Are you opposed to those services that they provide? Granted that most of the people in there may not necessarily be married.
The non-abortive services, I think that those are, I'm not necessarily opposed to those. As a company, I think that they can be allowed to do those sort of things. But once we get into the abortive side, specifically that kind of stuff, there are other practices that I don't necessarily, I wouldn't support, but I think that specifically the abortive practices, that kind of thing, that's where they start getting into territory that they don't really have a right to be on.
If a woman who was pro-choice was to come up to you and say, "What is it your right to tell me what I do with my body?" What would you respond to her? I
would agree that I am not going to try and make claims over her body. I'm not going to try and legislate her body, but it's not her body. That's the fundamental difference between what. That's the reason that I think that that's wrong. I think that people should have the right to do what they want with their own body. That's one thing that the Center for Medical Progress. That's one thing. If you watch those videos, you see the fetal tissue, and it is fetal tissue. You see arms and legs. There's no denying that is a body and that it's someone else's body. And unless you're going to make the claim that it's that there are women, with 4 arms and 4 legs, it's fundamentally not their body.
In the news recently, they have been alleged for selling fetal tissue. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that it just goes to show, I don't think that we should be terribly surprised. I think that that's one aspect of how that reflects the nature of Planned Parenthood as a company, the fact that they are willing to disregard the laws when they think that they can get away with it.
What would you say to the arsonist of the Planned Parenthood building, assuming that he did target it based off political reasons?
They attacked that building because they disagree with Planned Parenthood. I would say that they really have no understanding of what we're trying to do with the protest. If they think that they are helping us, or making doing anything good in that, I would say that they're wrong. The whole, if they, trying to get into the mind of the arsonist, if they thought, they're like, oh, there's this protest against Planned Parenthood, there's this movement, I've got my people with me, I would be safe in doing this, and then they went and attacked the building, they've got no conception of what we're trying to do. The whole point of us having a protest there was so that in the light of day, in the public eye, we could try and make a statement about Planned Parenthood, right? We're trying to change hearts and minds and get the people to change, the people to turn away from Planned Parenthood and not try and do some damage with vigilante justice or whatever. So they, yeah. So I hope that they are brought to justice. I think that they need to be, you know, you know, you know, punished and brought to justice for that.
Next, you'll meet Tyler. He tells me why he supports Planned Parenthood and the political issues that surround its funding.
So, talking about like women's healthcare in general, you know, if you look at the gender diversity of Senate, the Congress, and the White House, you see a lot of men. And so when these men are legislating women's bodies, that can be a real issue because, you know, like I said before, it's like I don't ever have to worry about having an abortion. So in an ideal world, if that costs money, I don't see any reason to keep it around because it's not personally affecting me. And so when you multiply that by congressmen and people who are influencing the world around us, which is primarily male-dominated, I think that there are a lot of issues with women's health that gets ignored.
What do you think is the biggest roadblock that pro-choice people face?
I think that the biggest issue is, especially if you are standing in support of Planned Parenthood specifically, that there are a lot of organizations that are against Planned Parenthood and their mission, and that the misinformation, you know, a lot of these people have a lot of money, and so they can spread like misconceptions and lies about Planned Parenthood and the pro-choice movement because they have the money to do so. And it's kind of, even if you tell a lie often enough, it becomes truth to enough people. And I think that's where a lot of the issues lie, especially with the violence. There have been 2, at least so far within the past few months, Planned Parenthoods that have been burnt down. And so they're kind of creating this like violent culture around a political issue.
What would you say to the arsonist at this Planned Parenthood if you had the chance to speak to him?
I would say that overall it seems like the curve of action is spurred off of the videos. A lot of people at the protest had signs that said, "Have you seen the videos?" And so I think that, you know, if you take those videos at face value and you really believe that Planned Parenthood is selling like baby parts, I think that's enough to get somebody riled up to burn down the Planned Parenthood. But I think that, again, they're selling misconceptions. So that's one of the biggest issues.
What are those misconceptions?
Well, so the misconception one is that like the biggest thing that they're trying to push right now is that Planned Parenthood sells baby parts for a profit, and legally, so the Republican committees that have investigated Planned Parenthood, they've already completed 2 investigations and found no wrongdoing. But they're basically looking at where if you are a mother who has had an abortion, you can, in your paperwork, sign that you are okay with that that fetal tissue being donated for scientific purposes. And at that point, companies who do scientific research can pay Planned Parenthood the cost that it would take to ship and process, so, you know, assembling, so anything that the shipping costs and everything else, basically enough to cover the costs to get that that fetal tissue.
So Planned Parenthood has actually stopped seeking reimbursement for the fetal tissue that is donated to medical research and whatnot. Do you think that's the right step for them?
I think it's a political move. So for them to cover the the shipping and everything, I think that's more of like being careful because they would lose about 46% of their funding if they get defunded by the government. And I think that, you know, in a perfect world, I don't see that as somebody paying for a dead baby. I think that it's a research company wants to do good for science and humanity, and so they are covering the costs of shipping. And so now you're putting that burden on Planned Parenthood, and the fact that it is being spun as selling dead baby parts versus, you know, the scientific and actually good for humanity that it is, I think that's kind of dangerous because at that point they're going to be using a lot of their funding, which I don't think that they get enough funding already. And so that makes it a lot more difficult for them to do their job.
So have you always been pro-choice?
Yes, I've always been pro-choice.
And why has that been? What's shaped that view you have?
I always, I don't really have any of the religious background to be pro-life. I am more in preference of giving women their choice to regulate their own bodies. I don't think that as a society we should be able to tell women what they can and cannot do with their bodies.
Pro-life supporter Elizabeth discusses her religious views and why she disagrees with the abortive services that some Planned Parenthoods provide.
I have a problem with Planned Parenthood because you're right. I think the number they give is 3%. Although in the congressional hearing, I believe Cecil Williams under oath said that they get something like 84% of their revenues from abortions. So that's another thing entirely. But as far as the other women's health care they do, I would say, well, two things. One, I don't care what good things they do. Again, but they murder children. That completely doesn't matter that you're getting lollipops out the door or pregnancy tests or treatment for STDs. Doesn't matter. And I also, would say that, people say that if you get rid of Planned Parenthood, people with low income will have nowhere to get health care, and that's just not true. I think there are 900,000, some was the number, of health centers located in 98% of the districts, as opposed to I think it's 600 Planned Parenthood, or 700. There are other ways for women's health care to be distributed, and that's why I'm not just against defunding Planned Parenthood, but eventually I would like them to be shut down.
What would you say is your biggest problem with Planned Parenthood?
I think they're liars, and I cannot believe they try and parade themselves as proponents of women, because I think they are a war on women.
What would you say disturbed you the most about the videos?
Honestly, it's not that they're selling them. That's despicable. I think it is, but I think it's despicable that they're throwing them, before we knew they were selling them, that they were throwing them in dumpsters or down toilets. Or the video that was the hardest for me to watch was I think the fourth one, and besides some of the interviews, they showed some behind the scenes in a clinic, and there's a video of a pie dish. They dumped the severed limbs of a child there, and the child was still kicking, and it's on video. And honestly, seeing that, it just I can't fathom someone being able to see that, and it just means and not be able to have their heart softened, which I believe is why a lot of people refuse to watch them, is because they know they wouldn't be able to see that and remain pro-abortion.
Would abortion at any circumstance be okay?
No.
Incest?
I don't think any other sin justifies murder or rape. That one's brought up a lot, and there's a lot of you can look up. There's a lot of videos, interviews with, for example, abortion survivors who were rape victims, and you see them. These are live people, and they're walking around, and they're so they're so grateful that they lived. And there's this wonderful person that came out and was able to do good in the world, even though out of such a despicable act. And I think that's a testimony to the fact that the women who did, anyway, the ones that didn't choose abortion and chose life for their children, were able to turn something that was horrible and make good out of it.
Are you religious at all?
I am a Christian.
Would you say that a Christian who was pro-choice, would you say they can't be a Christian?
Yeah, I would. I'd say, I grant that there are confused people, in the sense that, I was reading an article the other day. It was about someone who genuinely believes that, someone who genuinely goes in and believes that it's tissue, and I grant, and that's why I think being a Christian is the perfect place to be, because there is forgiveness. For you can completely you can be a Christian, have had an abortion. God forgives us for that. And that's the hope of the gospel. But at the same time, I don't believe that you can be a faithful and a Christian and be pro-abortion, because I do think it's murder.
Many people share your views of being pro-life. What makes you so passionate about it and willing to go protest?
Well, for one, I'm not the only one. What's amazing is, you have Poland and Moscow. Those aren't exactly big cities. I'm from Nashville. And yet we had, I think it was 500 people at that first protest, and close to that, the second one. There's a lot of people who are willing to put aside, times of their day to go do that. But for me personally, I'd say two things. One, my first thing is just, I think God has given me a heart for I have 6 younger siblings. One of them has autism, and she's precious to me. And I think, if I'm not sure this is statistics on being able to figure out something about autism before someone's born, but I know Down syndrome is a major reason why people decide to do abortion. And sometimes when I see my little sister and how much I love her, even though she has difficulties, it just renews in me the desire to try and touch as many people to save as many lives as I can.
Lastly, we spoke with Lauren, a pro-choice supporter. She explains why it's important to become educated on both sides before deciding whether to be pro-choice or pro-life. Are you religious?
I am, but my religious beliefs really don't say too much, like they don't influence how I believe about women's health care. But yes, I am religious.
Well, I do believe there are pro-choice people.
Right. Oh yeah, there's plenty out there. I mean, even on the pro-choice side, you can be religious and be pro-choice. You really just gotta do your own research.
When do you believe life begins?
Scientifically, after 3 months. I think when a brain starts developing, that a fetus's brain starts developing and starts, connecting all of these different systems together, that I believe that's when a coherent life starts.
So say if a pregnant woman was attacked, say at 2 months, and the baby did not survive, would you support a homicide charge?
No, at that point I would not. I would say that after 3 months, then it would be the fetal infanticide charge. But I get this argument a lot in response to abortions. And I would like to point out that these are very, very different situations. In the fetal infanticide situation, the woman is being attacked and she has absolutely no control over the loss of her child. But when it comes to an abortion per se, that comes on with a lot of different, that's a personal choice. That is, for whatever reason, if it's medical, if it's personal, like that's completely different in my mind almost. Like that, the female infanticide, someone's being attacked, this is being done to them and they don't really have control over it. Versus, termination of a pregnancy, which is a very personal choice that is, unique to a person's situation.
Why do pro-life people oppose Planned Parenthood so much?
I think the media has a lot to do with what people look at and what people pay attention to, and they don't take aside the time to do their own research and maybe look at both sides of the story. Don't just look at anti, don't just look at the pro. Like I've looked at anti-Planned Parenthood arguments as well. You can't have an argument and not be challenging it. So I believe that that's very important, and I think that when you stick on one side or the other and don't do any research elsewhere, you can get really misinformed.
What would you say to the arsonist who burned the building?
Kind of just, how dare you? How dare you take such hate? I mean, like these people, I don't want to generalize and say these people, but the anti-Planned Parenthood side, they talk about love and they talk about wanting to help life, and that is purely destructive. Purely. There is not one good thing that comes out of it. How much it just blows my mind that someone would go to such lengths and such hate because of their beliefs. It blows my mind.
Why do you think people have such a hard time with Planned Parenthood, the pro-life people? When abortions are such
only
a small,
3%, yeah,
only 3% of what they do, why do people have such an issue with them?
I think, and at the protest, I found this a lot where I had people coming up to me being like, oh no, health care, I'm fine for women's health care, but it's the abortion part that I have a problem with. And the thing is when it's kind of an all or nothing thing. You can't just be like, oh, you have rights up until this point, And I think that women's health care, the reason it's kind of more stigmatized is I think there's a historical background to it. I think there's a societal background to it. Back in the past and even sometimes today, people believe that, women's sexuality should remain within a heteronormative marriage in their bedroom. Some people still believe that, and that, they stigmatize women for going out of that system of society. And even though, religion doesn't run the whole United States, run the whole world anymore, those ideologies are still enforced into our society. So I think it is still stigmatized. Women being sexual is stigmatized.
If you were to pick one argument to represent your side, pro-choice, what would it be?
Altogether, I would probably say, stop assuming that you know people's lives and stop assuming that you know what people are going through, and talk to them and connect with them and find them as people instead of numbers. Instead of you had an abortion, so you're this. Start seeing them as people with feelings and lives and different situations that they're having to go through and you're not. So I really feel like that's something people really need to start. I mean, in not even just Planned Parenthood, just in life in general, start seeing people as people. And it'll amaze you of what you find.
For all of us at Inside Out, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Good night.